the Herero at the Waterberg could not possibly have known was that instead of planning negotiations, the Germans were assembling a colonial army unlike any other. Week after week in the late summer of 1904, hundreds of soldiers were sent from Germany, along with huge supplies of the latest weapons and artillery. One of the soldiers of this new army, the young Lieutenant Ritter von Epp, wrote letters to his family while on his way to Namibia. They reveal the extent to which some in the army had come to see the war as a crusade for Lebensraum.
This world is being redistributed. With time, we will inevitably need more space, and only by the sword will we be able to get it. This is a matter for our generation, and for our existence.
Only when he was convinced that he had acquired overwhelming military might did General von Trotter order his army out of their bases and head for the Waterberg. On the morning of the 11th of August 1904, the German cannons and machine guns began to fire on the Herero. General von Trotter's battle plan was, as he said in his own words, to encircle and annihilate the Herero with a simultaneous blow. But these plans were not what they seemed. Von Trotter had left one side of the encirclement weaker, knowing that when they were defeated, the Herero would have to retreat through this gap in the German line. This would force them to escape eastwards. And to the east lay the desert that the Herero called the Omahake, but we know as the Kalahari. By the end of the battle, this was exactly what was happening. The Germans pursued the defeated Herero. For week after week in the summer of 1904, they were pushed deeper and deeper into the Omahake Desert. Once the Herero had been forced past the last waterholes, the Germans built a 200-mile-long line of guard posts to seal them in the desert. Now trapped, thousands began to die of thirst and starvation. But finally, to seal the fate of the Herero, von Trotter did something unprecedented in colonial history.
The history of European rule in late 19th and early 20th century Africa is unbelievably brutal. But what sets the genocide apart of the Herero in German Southwest Africa is General von Trotter's explicitly articulated Vernichtungsbefehl, the annihilation order, in which he committed to paper his plan to destroy the Herero people.
On the 1st of October, 2 months after the Battle of Waterberg, von Trotter and a group of German soldiers reached the waterhole of Asombo Windimbe. The next morning, von Trotter read out a proclamation to his troops.
I, the great general of the German soldiers, send this letter to the Herero people. Within the German borders, every Herero, with or without a gun, will be shot. I will no longer accept women and children.
The important thing about Asombo Windimbe is the putting down into writing an official sanctioning of genocide. Why did this take place? I think that the situation had reached an extent where the German military believed that this was perfectly acceptable. They did not see that this was possibly controversial.
The Herero people must leave the land. If they do not do this, I will force them with the cannon. These are my words to the Herero people. The great general of the mighty Kaiser.
The thousands of starving Herero in the Omahake now seemingly had no hope. But in Berlin, the news of von Trotter's extermination order was a shock. The army and its supporters in the Reichstag had badly misjudged the changeable mood of the German people.
When news of the brutality with which Trotter and his troops are putting down the uprising reaches Germany, there are huge and radical protests above all in the Reichstag, above all among the Centre Party. On this issue, they are radically opposed to the actual policies being conducted. And there are also newspaper articles. It's a national scandal, if you like.
Despite the scandal, the Kaiser refused to order von Trotter to rescind his extermination order. For 2 further months, the Hereros were hunted down in the Omahake, until finally the government forced the Kaiser's hand. On the morning of the 9th of December, a telegram was sent ordering von Trotter to accept the surrender of the Herero. The German army now began patrols to collect what was left of the Herero people. 13,000 were rounded up. Soldiers took photographs of their work. After 6 months being hunted by the German army, the Herero were terrified and untrusting. To persuade them to surrender, German soldiers and missionaries told the Herero that they'd been pardoned by the Kaiser and would now be allowed to return to their homelands. But this was a lie. What Germany now began was an extension of their policy of extermination, using more efficient 20th century methods. Here, by the old German fort in Windhoek, the capital of modern Namibia, lies the site of Germany's first mass concentration camp. In this tiny space, over 4,000 people were beaten, worked, and starved to death by the army of the Second Reich. What happened here and in other camps across this country is something that few people in Germany and Namibia have been willing to confront. But this is where the Herero collected by the army were sent, and where the first genocide of the 20th century reached its terrible conclusion. In 1904, concentration camps were a military innovation that had only been used twice before. But in Namibia, the concept was applied in a completely new way.
Concentration camps in the British model in South Africa or the original Spanish model in Cuba were essentially designed to separate freedom fighters from the people who supported them. In German Southwest Africa, something very different was going on. There were no more free Herero people. They were all, or almost all, in camps.
In the early months of 1905, the Herero was shuttled around the country in cattle trucks. Thousands of them arrived here in Swakopmund. This town, trapped between the great dunes of the Namib Desert and the icy cold waters of the South Atlantic, was the colony's main port. A concentration camp was built here because Swakopmund was a center of German industry and commerce, a place where the slave labor of the prisoners could be best put to use. No one today knows exactly where Swakopmund's 2 concentration camps were located. Yet what happened in those camps was meticulously recorded, documented, and photographed by the Germans themselves. 3,000 Herero were imprisoned in Swakopmund. The majority were women and children. They were made to unload the ships that landed in port and to work on new building projects. Beatings were common, but the conditions in the camps alone proved fatal for many Herero prisoners.
Many members of my own family died in the concentration camps at Swakopmund, because in Swakopmund the weather is extremely cold, and they were not used to that cold weather. They were given only maybe 1 blanket or so. Many of them died. The food was limited, scarce.
The whole system was run with bureaucratic efficiency.
What happened is when the Herero were captured, they were assigned a number. And this number was noted down in a book. And these numbers could then be shifted around to whoever needed labor. And the German military was paid for this